welcome back to book 24 of the Odyssey, aka the end of the story.
Book 24, I have been waiting for this, so thank you very much, Lottie, and thanks for all the great stuff that you do on your channel. If you don't follow Lottie on My Classics Portal, do so, do yourself a favour. And if actually you wanted to hear Lottie talking about the Odyssey, and yours truly, you can check out the latest Ancient History Hound podcast, where we discuss the Odyssey and the film The Return. We touch on a couple of the topics that Lottie spoke about there, and I've got a few points I'd like to add and get into, because Book 24 is an interesting one, and I'm actually going to start with Book 24 itself. There's some controversy about it, because it's thought that Book 24 was added on later, and this isn't a modern idea. In fact, there was an argument going around in the Hellenistic period. Around the 2nd century BC, there were two head librarians of Alexandria, Aristophanes and Aristarchus. Both of them argued basically that Book 24 was a later edition. So even back in that period, it was thought that that may have been the case. And in fact, they argued that the end of the Odyssey was towards the end of Book 23, where the pair, that is to say Odysseus and Penelope, are reunited. So it's an interesting idea that this is an addition. And I'd like to get your thoughts. If you haven't already been made aware of that argument, perhaps go and reread the book and have a think. Think to yourself, yeah, possibly, possibly not. Interested to hear your thoughts. Anyway, let's get into the book. And there are three things here that I want to talk about specifically, and I think Lottie actually referred to most of them. The first is what I think is a bit of dark humor here. I think this is quite funny, unintentionally funny, and perhaps you don't realize it until you realize it, as it were. And that is when the suitors are going to the underworld. So to start with, you have Hermes, who raises up the spirits and takes them to the underworld. And first of all, we have this really weird simile. So Homer loves similes. It's all over the shop with his similes, often uses them, a really interesting device. And apparently, the souls or spirits of the suitors, are gathering around Hermes as he leads them to the underworld. And they're squeaking like bats. I don't know of any simile in Homer that invokes bats. If there is one that I've missed, let me know. And when they get down there, it gets a bit more interesting, and I think a bit more comical. Because one of the suitors bumps into Agamemnon, and Agamemnon says, "Hey, what are you doing down here?" And of course, the suitor tells his story. And what's interesting actually there is that the suitor doesn't actually seem to have any remorse about his actions. He said, "Well, I was just doing fine up there, and they had this woman who was tricking me, Penelope, a wife of Odysseus, and she was fooling us all." And of course, this is always a bad thing to go on or get close to in terms of a topic with Agamemnon, because Agamemnon loves nothing more than to moan and whinge about women, particularly wives. We've seen that earlier on in the Odyssey, where he just goes on. He is that person. You've got to keep him away from the topic. I mean, it must have been quite difficult being in the underworld with him, because you can't ever mention women or wives. And he just goes off on one saying, "Yeah, well, Odysseus was lucky. He got a great wife. Oh, would you believe mine?" Anyway, so there's that. The next one is about Laertes. It's about someone who is very much alive, and it's this really weird interaction that Odysseus has. So Odysseus goes and visits his dad, but he doesn't make a reveal to him. He seems to test him. Now, of course, the Odyssey is a series of tests. You see that people are tested throughout it, mostly Odysseus, but he's testing other people. And there's been a few arguments as to why this is. And I remember reading an article years ago, and I wish I'd written the author down and where I got it from, but it was many years ago, and it was a really interesting argument. And this was that this is actually symbolic. So the reason that Odysseus tests his father is because it's not necessarily his father that he's testing. He's actually testing what was thought to be sort of the elder community on the island, whether they would back him or not. And you can see this perhaps in a variation. There may have been a variation of this story where perhaps it wasn't just Laertes on his own. He was with other senior or elders of the community. And again, Odysseus can't make a power grab until he's established that they will back him. So this is almost a symbolic thing. And of course, it gets reduced down to one individual, but ultimately, or at one point, it was presumably a symbolic thing. And I always think that's a really interesting idea. I don't know if it's true. Again, we can't know, but I think it stands a good test anyway. Finally, Eupythes. Finally, the ending, which is just, I find really odd at points. And again, it does move to this whole how book 24 ends and wraps things up. So after Odysseus has done what he's done, he realizes he's going to be highly unpopular on the island. And of course he is. Eupeithes, who's the father of Antinous, one of the suitors, gathers people around and says, hang on a sec, let's just do a body count here. Odysseus just seems to be taking large amounts of our demographic, young citizen males or young sort of noble males, and they don't come back. He took them all off to the Trojan War. They didn't come back. And now he's just come back and he's just got rid of a whole bunch of them. We don't like this. And he confronts Odysseus. And here you see a very interesting thing, because the Odysseus of old would have had a great argument. But this isn't what happens at all. When the confrontation occurs, Athena appears in the form of Mentor, who's a chap who appears elsewhere in the the Odyssey, and she takes his form elsewhere. She does when they're having the big fight in the hall. And she persuades Laertes to just throw a spear in his face, which Laertes does. At that point, Odysseus just breaks ranks and starts hacking away at the people. So it's a really violent ending to what you'd expect to be something which is in Odysseus's wheelhouse. That is to say, a diplomatic or sort of far more tactical, strategic conversation that you could have with these people. Talk them down, not hack them to bits. But that's what happens. And then Athena, in the form of Mentor, says, whoa, hang on, guys. We should negotiate a peace, which happens. And that's how the poem ends. So you have Athena sort of rousing these people to have a big scrap, and then telling everyone, just chill your boots, guys. We got to, I was joking. I don't know. So it's a really strange ending to the poem, and that's how it ends. Mentor just basically brings the two sides together. They go, yeah, fair enough. It's okay now. That's it. And as I said, I always find this a very strange ending. I didn't think that it would end there. So anyway, that's the end of book 24, and that's the end of the poem. Really looking forward to what Lottie does with the Iliad. I can't wait. What are your thoughts? Anything on that? And if you've read book 24 and you've not thought about it in that context, let me or Lottie know. But thanks again, Lottie.